They only killed one human. Not in the way wars are fought. Not in the way empires fall. There was no battlefield, no last stand, no desperate transmission begging for survival. It happened in the most dangerous place in the galaxy precisely because it was designed to feel safe. The Galactic Council spire, where civilizations gathered to pretend violence had become obsolete. One moment, Dr. Adrian Vale stood beneath the luminous weight of 1,000 watching worlds. The next, the universe removed him. There was no sound to announce it, no warning siren, no dramatic rupture in space-time, only a microscopic shift in the air pressure of the chamber, like reality itself had briefly inhaled and forgotten to exhale. Vale had been speaking mid-sentence, voice steady, hands relaxed at his sides, the posture of someone who believed words still had jurisdiction in places like this. Then the Phrex envoy spoke its accusation. Then the council listened. And then the decision was made, not by vote, not by debate, but by systems so old and so deeply trusted that no one remembered the last time they had been questioned. Energy condensed. Space complied. And one human ceased to exist. For a fraction of a second afterward, the chamber did something no one noticed at first. It waited, not for reaction, not for applause or outrage. It waited for the absence to resolve itself into something understandable. Because in every known civilization, death still left traces. Heat decay, signal residue, emotional echo. This time there was nothing, just a clean, impossible void where a person had been. The holographic stars above the council dome continued to rotate, indifferent. Entire fleet stationed beyond the spire held position in silent synchronization, their captains receiving confirmation logs that classified the event as resolved diplomatic termination, a routine correction, a procedural closure. But inside the chamber, something was wrong in a way no instrument immediately flagged. Eyes turned slowly toward the empty space, not in grief, not yet in confusion, because humans did not behave like other species. That was the one consensus the Council had never managed to erase from its predictive models. They reacted incorrectly. They escalated unpredictably. They attached meaning to things that should have remained transactional. And yet here was one of them, gone. No protest signal. No emergency override. No fleet activation from hidden human reserves. Just silence. A silence so precise it felt engineered. Somewhere deep within the spire's ancient architecture, dormant monitoring systems registered a subtle anomaly, a delay in external human communication networks. Not disruption, not interference. Suspension, as if every human system had paused at the exact same moment the man disappeared. The Council did not notice this yet, but something far older than protocol did. And in the absence where Dr. Adrian Vale had stood, reality itself seemed to hesitate, like it was waiting to see what humanity would choose to do with a universe that had just made its first irreversible mistake. The Galactic Council spire was never meant to feel like a place. It was designed to feel like inevitability, suspended above the Kezran Rift. It hung in orbit around a collapsed star system that no longer belonged to physics as much as it belonged to memory. The spire's structure stretched across kilometers of engineered void, rings of alien metallurgy, translucent corridors woven through gravitational scaffolds, and observation domes that bent starlight into controlled patterns of color and meaning. Every civilization that had ever joined the Council had added something to it. No one remembered what the original structure looked like anymore. Perhaps it no longer existed at all. Inside, reality was adjusted for diplomacy. Gravity was not fixed but negotiated, subtly tuned per sector, so that no species felt physically inferior or dominant. Atmospheric composition shifted in slow waves, accommodating hundreds of respiratory chemistries at once. Even silence was curated, engineered to avoid triggering species that interpreted absence of sound as hostility. And yet, beneath all of it, the spire never stopped feeling like a weapon pretending to be a cathedral. At its center lay the Grand Convergence Chamber, a vast circular expanse where gravity softened into a gentle downward pull, allowing thousands of delegates to stand or float in layered tiers of authority. Above them, the ceiling was not a ceiling at all, but a live projection of the known galaxy. Shifting star maps, active war zones glowing in restrained reds, treaty systems pulsing in calm blues, and entire sectors marked in unstable flickers where diplomacy had failed too many times to be trusted. Every motion in that sky meant something. Every flicker was a negotiation. Every fade was a warning. And beneath it all stood the Council itself. Thousands of representatives from species that had once tried to destroy each other before realizing destruction was inefficient compared to administration. They were not united. They were contained. At the lower tiers, biological species clustered in guarded formations, armored exoskeletons, translucent neural clouds, beings whose emotions leaked into the air as faint pressure changes. Higher up, energy-based intelligences hovered in shifting geometries, their presence bending light into mathematical shapes that hinted at thought rather than speech. Even the human delegations, scattered across observation balconies, remained unusually still, as if instinctively aware that movement here always carried political weight. And above them all, watching without eyes or face, was the verdict infrastructure, not a council member, a system, an ancient decision engine woven into the spire itself, older than most recorded civilizations, designed to accelerate judgment when diplomacy failed too slowly. It did not speak. It did not debate. It simply calculated reality into outcomes and presented them as inevitability. It was trusted more than any living authority. That trust was the problem, because trust, in a place like this, had been optimized over millennia into something indistinguishable from surrender. On this day, the chamber was already tense before Dr. Adrian Vale arrived, not because of him specifically, but because of what humanity represented in council mathematics, an unresolved variable that refused to stabilize across centuries of observation. Human behavior did not converge. It diverged. It did not simplify under pressure. It multiplied. They were unpredictable in the one way the council could never tolerate. They learned faster than they could be categorized. Vale entered through the lower diplomatic gate alone. No escort formation. No ceremonial display. No visible defensive augmentation. Just a single human walking into a structure built by civilizations that measured safety in orbital bombardment potential. Conversation in the chamber did not stop. It recalculated. Because even before anything was said, the presence of human in a place like this was already a statistical deviation that demanded attention. And in a galaxy governed by systems that believed deviation was the first symptom of collapse, attention was never neutral. The accusation did not arrive as words first. It arrived as a shift in temperature across political space, a subtle tightening of the chamber's diplomatic atmosphere, like invisible pressure valves closing one by one. Conversations that had been flowing in layered translation suddenly thinned. Entire clusters of delegates recalibrated their attention at once, as if responding to a signal no one admitted to sending. Then the Threx envoy stepped forward. Its presence alone altered the geometry of the room. Massive exoskeletal plating caught the chamber's controlled starlight and fractured it into sharp, predatory angles. Each movement carried the weight of an ecosystem built for conquest. When it spoke, the sound was not projected. It was imposed, vibrating through shared structural harmonics, so that even translation systems briefly hesitated before rendering meaning. Human entity Dr. Adrian Vale, it declared, is responsible for unauthorized interference in Threx classified extraction zones. A pause, not for emphasis, for confirmation from systems already preparing the outcome. Above the chamber, the galaxy map flickered. A small sector near the Kezran boundary flashed red, preloaded escalation protocols activating before any diplomatic verification completed. Council subroutines engaged in parallel, bypassing slower organic debate. In the Galactic Council spire, accusation and consequence were often separated only by milliseconds of processing time. Dr. Vale remained still, not frozen, not unaware, simply present in a way that suggested he understood the weight of being observed by civilizations that had long since abandoned mercy as a primary function. That's incorrect, he said. 2 words, soft, measured, and immediately irrelevant. Because within the chamber's infrastructure, truth was not determined by assertion. It was determined by consensus-weighted verification algorithms. And those algorithms had already begun trending toward resolution. A second Threx signal followed, embedded this time in data packets rather than speech. Images flooded the council display. mining corridors, damaged extraction drones, a Threx operative corpse suspended in low gravity. Evidence curated with surgical precision. The chamber shifted, not emotionally, procedurally. Multiple species adjusted stance probabilities. Defensive postures activated in anticipation of downstream conflict. Even human observers from other colonies tightened their focus, recognizing the familiar rhythm of prejudgment escalation. The verdict infrastructure responded next. A faint pulse of light traveled through the spire's architecture, entering the chamber like a slow breath. It was not visible to most beings, but every system connected to Council authority registered it as case acceptance. The accusation had been acknowledged by the governing intelligence. From that moment forward, outcome probability narrowed. Dr. Vale's presence became a variable being solved rather than a participant in dialogue. He noticed it. Everyone who understood Council procedure noticed it. The transition from discussion to determination, from diplomacy to execution. A human analyst in the upper tiers whispered something that translation systems did not fully render, but the tone carried unmistakable recognition of inevitability. The Threx envoy did not demand punishment. It simply waited, because in Council precedent, once the verdict infrastructure engaged, outcomes rarely required further negotiation. Dr. Vale finally looked upward, not at the envoy, but at the shifting galaxy map above them. His expression did not show fear. Instead, something quieter formed behind his eyes. Not resistance, comprehension. As if he had already calculated the direction this was moving. And somewhere deep within the spire's ancient systems, unnoticed by the chamber itself, a long-dormant subsystem flagged a rare anomaly. Human subject exhibiting non-reactive emotional state under terminal classification conditions. It was marked as statistically insignificant, then ignored. The chamber continued toward judgment, not realizing that, in the presence of a species like humanity, judgment was never a one-sided function. The moment the verdict infrastructure finalized its decision, the chamber did not announce it. It enforced it. There was no ceremonial declaration, no spoken sentence of condemnation. Instead, reality itself shifted in a way only the most sensitive systems could interpret at first, like a line of code being executed too deeply to reverse. Above the grand convergence chamber, the galaxy map froze. Every moving war front, every diplomatic corridor, every flickering sector of contested space simply stopped updating for a fraction of a second, not because communication failed, but because all external Council adjudication channels had synchronized on a single outcome state. Termination authorized. The Threx envoy did not react. It didn't need to. Its systems had already anticipated confirmation before the chamber even realized it had been issued. Around it, subordinate fleet commands across distant space began preloading execution sequences. Quietly, efficiently, without emotion. A human life was not a moral variable here. It was a resolved input. Inside the chamber, Dr. Adrian Vale felt the change before it happened. Not fear, not panic, something colder, a subtle absence of agency, as if the room itself had gently, politely decided he no longer needed to participate in what came next. He looked upward again. The verdict sphere above the chamber responded. For the first time in recorded Council history, it did not project judgment. It collapsed probability space. A thin line of light formed around Vale, barely visible at first, like a tracing outline drawn by reality itself. The chamber's ambient systems adjusted instinctively, gravity compensation tightening, atmospheric density stabilizing, safety protocols assuming conclusion. Delegates shifted without realizing why. Some leaned back, some looked away, some simply stopped breathing for a moment their biology would later refuse to explain. The sphere initiated termination vectoring. It was not an explosion, not energy discharge. It was precision at a scale so refined it bordered on absence, removal without residue, deletion without trace, a clean discontinuation of a biological timeline. The air around Vale tightened. Space itself seemed to compress inward by a fraction of a centimeter that no instrument would later agree had occurred. And then, something interrupted it. Not a force, not a weapon, a delay. The execution sequence stalled for exactly 0.003 seconds. In Council systems, that was nothing. In execution protocols of absolute certainty, that was impossible. The sphere recalculated. Once, twice, and then something within its architecture registered an inconsistency. The target's informational signature was no longer singular. Dr. Adrian Vale's presence in the system had fractured into multiple overlapping states, not physically, but informationally, as if the concept of his existence had become distributed across variables the Council did not have permission to resolve. Across the chamber, every terminal connected to verdict authority flashed the same diagnostic anomaly: target coherence failure. For the first time, the execution did not proceed, not canceled, not aborted, paused. The chamber did not understand what that meant. Silence filled the space where certainty had been. The Threx envoy systems attempted recalculation, but even its aggression protocols hesitated against an undefined target state. Other delegates began to shift uneasily, their internal systems struggling to reconcile what they were witnessing with any known legal or physical framework. And above them all, the verdict sphere, engine of inevitability, architect of resolved outcomes, remained locked in a loop it had never been designed to enter, a judgment that refused to finalize. Dr. Vale exhaled slowly, not relieved, not afraid, just aware that something larger than the Council had just noticed the attempt. And in that realization, the universe itself felt, very briefly, less certain about who was allowed to decide what came next. The pause did not end. It spread. Across the grand convergence chamber, the first sign was subtle. Systems that had always obeyed instantly now hesitated by fractions of thought time. Translation matrices stuttered mid-sentence. Fleet coordination channels outside the spire returned incomplete handshakes. Even the verdict sphere, an entity designed to never hesitate twice, remained locked in a recursive loop of unresolved certainty. Dr. Adrian Vale stood at the center of it, still alive, still unerased. And now, undeniably the most expensive anomaly in the history of the Galactic Council. A ripple of confusion passed through the chamber, not emotional at first, but structural. The kind of confusion that begins in machines before it ever reaches minds. Entire tiers of delegates felt their internal systems quietly fail to agree with themselves. Threat assessments recalculated, then recalculated again, then stopped trusting the results entirely. Outside the spire, fleets that had already begun preloading termination sequences froze mid-action. Weapons powered up halfway, then held, then disengaged, not by command, by contradiction. Because every system trying to finalize Dr. Vale as a valid target encountered the same impossible result. Target state not stable. Inside the chamber, silence deepened, but it was no longer the silence of inevitability. It was the silence of a machine discovering it does not fully understand its own rules. The Threx envoy finally moved. Not in attack, in recalibration. Its armored frame shifted slightly, mandibles tightening as internal war systems attempted to resolve the anomaly. For the first time since its arrival, it did not broadcast confidence. Instead, fragmented diagnostic pulses leaked from its chassis, subtle, involuntary signals of uncertainty. Across the Council tiers, other species began to notice something even more unsettling. The human was not resisting. He was not defending. He was simply not completing, not resolving into any final state the Council could act upon. Dr. Vale raised his eyes toward the suspended verdict sphere, and this time it did not feel like observation. It felt like two systems trying to interpret each other across incompatible languages of reality. The sphere attempted again to finalize judgment. A second termination vector formed, then fractured, then reassembled incorrectly, then failed outright. For the first time in its existence, the sphere emitted a signal no one in the chamber had ever been trained to recognize. Unresolvable outcome condition. A quiet tremor passed through the chamber's architecture, not physical shaking, but conceptual instability, as if the idea of final decision had started to degrade at its foundations. Delegates began to react, not in unity, in fragmentation. Some backed away instinctively. Others attempted emergency protocol escalation, only to discover their authority pathways no longer returned confirmation from central systems. A few simply stood still, unable to determine whether they were witnessing an execution failure or the collapse of something far larger than an execution. Dr. Vale exhaled again. This time, the sound carried differently. Not defiance, not surrender, understanding. "They can't complete it," he said softly. No one responded, because response required certainty. And certainty had just been removed from the chamber. Outside, entire fleets across the Kesrin Rip began to drift out of formation. Not retreating, not advancing, but losing synchronized purpose as command structures failed to converge on a single valid action. Inside the spire, the verdict sphere dimmed slightly. Not shut down, not broken, just uncertain how to proceed in a universe that no longer allowed simple endings. And for the first time since the Council was founded, every civilization present realized the same terrifying truth. Judgment still existed. It just no longer knew how to finish what it had started. The verdict was never completed. It didn't end. It didn't resolve. It didn't collapse into war or mercy, or the clean finality the Council had depended on for millennia. It simply stopped making sense as a process. Across the grand convergence chamber, reality held its breath in a way no species had language for. The verdict sphere, once the unquestioned heart of galactic authority, hung suspended above Dr. Adrian Vale like a judgment that had forgotten its own conclusion. Its geometric rings rotated in slow, uncertain disagreement, each axis attempting to assert a different version of what truth should become next. No outcome finalized. No sentence executed. No collapse followed. Only a widening absence where certainty used to live. Fleet commanders outside the spire attempted to re-establish control protocols. Their systems answered, but incorrectly. Orders returned fragmented, refracted through layers of unresolved logic. Entire armadas drifted out of formation not because they were told to retreat, but because engagement and non-engagement no longer held stable definitions within the same operational reality. Weapons powered down mid-charge, as if the concept of firing had lost grammatical structure. Inside the chamber, delegates did not panic at first. They waited, because every civilization present had been built on the assumption that systems eventually complete, that judgment, once initiated, converges, that even chaos resolves into something you can act upon. But Dr. Vale stood at the center of the chamber, like a variable that refused closure, not defiant, not pleading, simply continuing. And that continuity was a threat no one had modeled. The verdict sphere attempted one final reconciliation. It pulled every available predictive architecture into a single synthesis: war outcomes, diplomatic cascades, extinction trees, containment branches stretching across probability space like collapsing galaxies. For a brief instant, the chamber filled with light that had no source, only interpretation. Then it failed, not explosively, not catastrophically, but silently, like a thought dissolving before it becomes language. A new signal propagated through council systems. Outcome space non-convergent. And for the first time in recorded history, the sphere did not present a verdict. It presented nothing. That absence rippled outward faster than any communication network could contain. Across species, across fleets, across the oldest treaties ever written in blood and vacuum and extinction, civilizations realized simultaneously that they were no longer inside a system capable of concluding them. Dr. Vale finally lowered his gaze, not because he had won, but because the structure around him had stopped behaving like something that could declare victory or defeat. "They don't know what to do with us anymore," he said quietly. His voice did not echo. The chamber had stopped reflecting meaning correctly. Outside the spire, stars remained unchanged, but the interpretation of them had shifted. Entire regions of space were no longer being actively categorized as enemy, neutral, or allied. Those definitions simply failed to apply with consistency. The Galactic Council did not fall. It did not survive. It entered a state no civilization had ever planned for: ongoing unresolved judgment. And in that endless, suspended moment between decision and definition, humanity remained exactly what it had always been in the Council's deepest predictive errors: a species that did not require the universe to finish deciding before it continued existing.